thank you very much. And it's nice to see so many of you here. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm calling in now from Somerset in the UK, and I live between Somerset in the UK and northern Sweden, where I'm founding a resilience project there as well. So I might talk a bit more about that. We're here today to explore a particular aspect of working effectively in groups together. And it's about supporting the journey of somebody coming into your group, being involved in your group and staying involved in your group, and then what happens when they need to end. So it's kind of like the journey or the life cycle of people coming through the groups. And this is an issue that's often neglected in many groups. And so this is after speaking with Dan about which area of effective groups and effective collaboration to focus on, we decided to focus on this aspect of someone's journey through a group. So that's what we'll be working with for the next hour and 20 minutes or so. I'll start off with a quick bit about myself, like why should you even listen to me about this? And then go into a bit of an intro about the content. And then most of the session today will be going into breakout groups and doing some exploration in small groups around how you could apply this stuff in your groups. So that's what we're up to. As I'm talking, feel free to put your hands up or interrupt me at any time. Otherwise, I'm just a bit like a kind of wind-up toy. I just tend to keep going. So do interrupt me if you have a question or something you wanted to say. So the short version of why you might want to listen to me about this stuff is I started off in the world of work in a conventional organization, conventional management hierarchy, and I didn't like it very much. It didn't feel very nice to me being told what to do, especially by somebody who didn't know the work as well as I did because he was a manager and he was somewhat distanced from the work. And I've always been fascinated by power dynamics, teams, how things work in groups and teams. And so I started exploring alternatives, different ways of working to bosses and the management hierarchy and people telling each other what to do. So I went on a deep dive into more flat, collaborative ways of working, learned about making decisions with consensus, formal consensus, and ended up delivering training courses in effective groups and effective collaboration, and doing research around eco-villages and intentional communities in North America and Europe. Went off to live in the woods with some friends, and we all had a big fight and fell out with each other because we had no group process and no way to kind of regulate how we were working together in a group. And what I found with that more kind of flat collaborative way of working was that it can work really well when you want to hear lots of different perspectives, but it can also take a long time. And people often still don't feel really heard, and people can get quite tangled up with each other. And so I felt like I kind of bounced up in some of the edges of the more flat collaborative ways of working, started seeking for alternatives again, ended up doing a MSc in management development and social responsibility, ended up discovering a methodology called holacracy, self-managing teams, self-organizing systems. And that was over 10 years ago. And then since then have took a deep dive into the more self-managing teams, distributed authority into clear roles, ways of working, and became an expert in that and bounced up against some of the edges of that way of working as well. And what I do now is kind of like an eclectic mix of lots of different collaborative methodologies, post-conventional ways of organizing, holacracy, a bit of sociocracy, other kinds of things like that. So what that kind of looks like nowadays, in terms of what I'm up to, is this is the company I'm working with. It's my company called Evolving Organization. It's about shifting beyond hierarchy to create resilient self-managing teams which adapt to an unstable world. So recognizing the kind of fundamentally unstable nature of the world we live in and how the groups and teams we work in need to be adaptive, adaptable and resilient. And run programs like Team Clarity and Faster Decision Making, the Meetings Revolution, work with Holacracy. And what I'm talking about today comes under this heading here, Effective Collaboration for Social Change. And I just wanted to share a little bit here about kind of some of the framing around the ideas of like effective groups and effective ways of working, and why we might even want to be looking at this. before I go into the other things. So I'm just mucking about with my screen just so that I can see everybody well while I'm doing this. Just give me a moment to do that. So there's an online program, an online course called Effective Collaboration for Social Change. So it's specifically for community, other social change groups to build their capacity to work better together. And I just specifically wanted to focus in on this particular bit, not this bit because I'm looking pretty rough there, but this bit over here, which is about in my kind of framing of like, oh, you know, we're working together, like to get stuff done, people need to work together. And we're facing an unpredictable and uncertain future. And one of my favorite quotes is that our future depends on our ability to work together because, and then I go into this kind of story, you know, we're facing a set of wicked problems in the world. Like the challenges that we're all facing, if you know that term, wicked problems, they're problems that are complex, fast changing, ambiguous, and can't be solved by any one particular person. And so because the problems that we're facing can't be solved by any one particular person, no matter how smart they are, they then need to be addressed collectively. So the challenge, I'm sure, you all know this, but I'm just doing it to kind of tee up what I'm going to say in a bit. So we need to face our challenges collectively and not by being split and being divided. And what's really needed then is collective intelligence to solve the kind of problems that we're facing. So all of the things, you know, like climate emergency and the economic problems and the migration crisis and post-colonial stuff, all that kind of stuff, no matter how smart one person is, they can't solve it on their own. We need to do it together. And we need to be able to work together in a way where the collective intelligence can be liberated so that the solution we come up with is better than any solution we could come up with on our own, which requires shifting beyond hierarchy, because it's the hierarchical structure isn't very good at liberating collective intelligence. So working together in ways beyond hierarchy creates conditions where collective intelligence can emerge for us to solve the wicked problems that we're facing. So that's one kind of piece I wanted to tee up on. And then the other piece is when we're working together in groups. Some of you may be familiar with this picture, the idea of a group development cycle. And any kind of group will be going through a cycle, something like this, forming a bit like a kind of honeymoon stage. People come together and we're all best friends. And then once we start working together, differences start to emerge. We go into more of a kind of storming phase. It's through the storming phase that we can start to figure things out and develop some kind of norms and establish like, well, how are we going to work together? And it's through establishing those norms that we can then become high-performing groups or teams. And the idea is that in each one of these, you know, a lot of you are probably familiar with this model as well. In each one of these different stages, there are specific things that you can do to support your group developing through that stage, which means it can kind of complete that stage well, move on to the next stage, and then face the challenges of the next stage. And so these are the things that are covered in the Effective Collaboration online course. And what I'm going to focus in on today is one of the aspects of a high-performing team, which is this aspect of how people join a group or a team, how you can sustain their involvement and keep them interested and keep a healthy balance. And also then when endings come, it comes time for them to end, how you can kind of have a good ending and a good closure. So that's what I'll be doing with you today. That's the kind of brief overview there. So I just want to pause at this point. I know I've just gone on for quite a long time. Just want to pause and see any kind of comments, reflections, questions, thoughts about any of that. And I know it often takes a while for the mind to get into gear, so I'll give a few moments. We're not in a desperate hurry. Yeah, Philippa.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you so much for being here with us. I just didn't want you to stay without feedback, and I thought, as it's not difficult for me, I start the round. at least there is some kind of response. Sometimes it's very weird to ask and then everyone is silent. And I just wanted to tell you that it makes a lot of sense. I resonate a lot. I've never. I have been writing a lot because I'm starting a movement of movements in Portugal. It's not part of my transition network. It's unpaid, so it's like work, unpaid work. And the narrative is very similar to yours. It's a bit different, so it really tickles my brain in a way that what is the difference, you know? So it's really interesting, and it makes sense. My experience with groups, everything makes sense what you are saying. So you know, my position is validating the experience that I'm having in a way that it makes really good structure in my own experience, and as well tickling my brain with the slight different narrative. So thank you. I'm curious.
Thank you, Philippa. That's great. And you just reminded me, actually, I'll put the link in the chat here. This link to this page that I just showed you, each one of those is a video. There's about 15-20 minutes long, the video. So it's got more information about all the stuff I just said in more detail. So if it's tickled your fancy in any way, you can go and kind of dive into that a bit more. So feel free to do that. So I see, Rakesh, you've raised your hand. Hey, Rakesh.
Yeah, hi there. Yeah, thanks. I was kind of laughing because it sounds like our journeys are pretty much the same. I started off in industry, getting really fed up and really annoyed at, the lack of collaboration. Went off, started a little eco village out in Croatia. Realized that, building houses, making money, black water, grey water, electricity, all that stuff's easy, but dealing with people, wow. And so that then got me on the journey, and I found sociocracy. Totally changed everything. Really looked at a lot of the different flat structures and what have you. And sociocracy really was the one that was easily accessible to me at the time. And basically, I've been helping a lot of groups, eco villages, and what have you, to actually understand governance. And quite often when I see new communities starting up, I kind of offer my services. What I find is almost none of them ever take me up on it until it's too late and they're pretty much killing each other. And then they come to me and say, "Oh, Rakesh, can you help me?" And sometimes it's too late, but I have saved several projects. So is there some kind of a trick, some way that you can, I mean, how is it that you package yourself to actually get in before it's too late and to actually help create the right kind of governance? I mean, the way that I teach anyway is I allow people to make mistakes. So I give them opportunities to try things out, to test it, make a mistake, and then offer more solutions until they really get it. So, but when it comes to living together in a community, when you're at this, that's a really catastrophic mistake to get to when you're literally hating every other person in the eco village and literally want to kill each other. So how do you kind of get in there to really help them really set themselves up in a good way so that they've got the best chance to really get off the ground?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, and we could do, a number of sessions on that question on its own. The kind of way that I tend to do it is to just try and do as much listening as possible, asking them, hey, what's going on? Really trying to understand what's going on in the group and some of the dynamics, and then listening for some of the kind of indicators of kind of grumbles and some pain points and things like that, and then reflecting back to them, because people aren't often always that happy about hearing those things, but reflecting them back and then seeing if they if there's any traction for doing anything about any of those things. So I often say, when I used to do this training before, in the meeting structure, one of the kind of conflict prevention techniques I have would be just before the break, let's do a grumbles session, and everybody just grumble. And, it's 10 minutes of grumbling. Doesn't need to be any responses, just grumble about stuff you're not happy about. And the idea is that people get their grumbles out in the air before they become too serious. And it's done before the break, because then people might actually chat about them in the break, or they might decide to do something different with the rest of the meeting or something. So it's really trying to listen, hear what's going on, surface stuff early, and then reflect back to them and see if there's any traction. That's kind of one method I use. I use others as well, but that's one of them.
That's amazing. I love the grumble session. That's brilliant. Awesome. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Rakesh. So in terms of where we are now, if any, we could take one more, if there's one more kind of comment or reflection on what I've shared so far. Otherwise, I can make a start with the topic for today. Okay. If there's nothing out, no one else jumping forward. The topic for today, in the performing section. So this is something that high-performing groups and high-performing teams do. And it's about people coming in to your group or to your project or to your team or anything, and finding a way for them to feel welcome. And so there's these 3 stages, and we're going to go through a cycle 3 times with these 3 stages, where I'm going to present something, then we're going to go into breakouts, and then we're going to have a conversation in the whole group afterwards. And the 3 stages are welcoming, sustaining, and ending. So I'm going to share a worksheet, which I'll share with you. You can have a copy of this as well. But this is the kind of worksheet for the session. So the 3 parts of it are welcoming, sustaining, and endings. And what's in the worksheet is like what needs to happen here, and then some ideas of good practice. So I just want to focus in at the moment. Let's just focus in on this bit, on the welcoming. So we're thinking about when new people join your group. Okay, so maybe you're in some kind of like social change group, transition initiative, community, something like that. What needs to happen when new people join your group? All right. I'm going to talk about this for a couple of minutes, then you're going to go into breakout groups of 2 or 3, and then talk about your experience and this as well. So I've been in loads of teams and groups where, you're in a meeting or you're doing something, someone says, oh yeah, Sonia's joining us today. Welcome, Sonia. This is her first meeting. Great. And that's it. It's like, well, who's Sonia? Where has she come from? Why is she here? What does she want? What's she looking for? What is she offering? And I'm sure Sonia doesn't feel very welcome either if someone says something like that. And then people are left to kind of fumble their way around. Well, how does this work? And who are you? And how do I do this? And how do meetings work? So this whole welcoming thing, in the corporate world, it's more kind of termed onboarding. But it's really about arriving. So somebody arriving into the group, them meeting and getting to know people, them finding their sense of belonging. So it's about finding my place, discovering the history of the group and how things work, learning the norms and the rules of how to be an effective member, and really feeling welcomed into the group. So I'm going to invite you, when you go into your groups, share what's your experience of new people coming into the group, like when you joined a group that you've been in, what's that been like, and when new people join. And then I got some suggestions of some good practice. Is this working, me kind of moving my screen around like this? Can you see it all right? Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's working good.
Good. Some suggestions of good practice around this. So you might think about these things when you're talking about it. So I'm just going to talk through these points. So some groups or organizations, they benefit from membership criteria, so that it's actually really clear to know whether somebody's in the group or not in the group. Was involved in Transition Glastonbury in Somerset, like over 10 years ago. It was about 2011, 2012. And we'd have this core group and we'd have these meetings, and then other people would come to the meetings, and then they'd come to a few meetings. And we had this really fuzzy boundary around the group. Well, is this person in the group or are they not in the group? And, do they get to be involved in making decisions, or are they not involved in making decisions, or can they do stuff or not? So having a clear boundary or kind of membrane around your group can really, really help. So some membership criteria, because having membership criteria can also make sure that you're getting the right people in the group. It's like, who do you want in your group? What kind of skills are you looking for? What kind of qualities are you looking for in your group? If you have those in your membership criteria, you're going to be more likely to attract the people that you actually want and need and who will fit in the group. So there's one piece, membership criteria. Another piece is having some kind of welcome interview to establish, like, what is someone looking for? Why are they joining the group? What's their reasons for being involved? And what are they offering? And then where might they fit? So if you have, if you're in a transition initiative and maybe you have some subgroups or some working groups, you know, which group might they fit into, and so on. And one way we used to do this is we used to have a role in our transition Glastonbury called matchmakers. And when somebody new joined, expressed an interest in joining, a matchmaker would go and have a cup of tea with them, meet them in a cafe, and have this kind of welcome interview to do that kind of basic fact finding with them and see where they fit. Then, you know, once you've established, yep, we've got some clear criteria, this is who we want, they've had a welcome interview, we want to invite them into the group, then some kind of orientation or induction or introduction to stuff like history, purpose, ground rules, conditions for being involved in the group, when they may be asked to leave, if there's any conditions where they may be asked to leave, how conflict gets managed, decision gets made, and so on. So that people who come into the group aren't fumbling around in the dark of trying to figure out how things work, but they're told it up front and then they can find their way around. You might have a buddying system where someone new gets buddied up with someone existing, and you may have one or several roles with an accountability for doing this kind of stuff, looking after people when they come in. So there's some good practice about it. That's what needs to happen in the welcoming stage, style. So did anything pop up, any kind of stories that anybody wants to share about good practice that they know or ideas they've had?
I actually have a question. Hi.
Mhm.
Something that I raised in our group um, is actually if you want someone, because you notice their style of operating and the way they are, and maybe they're not consciously aware, and you actually don't want them to be part of your group because you think it's going to be very disruptive. But they've got all the right values and intentions and everything else. And one example I was giving is a group I'm a part of, and there's a kind of another organization, and that person wants to join our group, but you know, we feel that would be very disruptive. And so, you know, and it's kind of a bulldozer type, right? Someone who operates in that way, but probably isn't very consciously, you know, they've been like that their whole life, right? This person is like 70, you know, they're not, it's, and so how you actually, you know, tactfully and not offensively, because we want to make good relations with him, you know, communicate those kind of things, because that's very personal, you know, very, very personal to be saying that. And it's, yeah, and someone could be easily offended and etc. So just wondering what your thoughts and take on that would be.
Yeah, so this is about the question of whether they actually come and join the group or not. So they've expressed an interest to join, and there's now some kind of conversation happening, or, you know, there's some kind of process, and are they going to be invited to join or not, right? It's not that they're in the group and you need them to leave. It's before
Well,
they...
no, we've determined we don't want them to join.
Yeah, good, great. So that's such a brilliant question. And this is a place where the membership criteria, so being clear about the membership criteria, and also being clear about your existing ways of working. So if you have, and this is why it's in the kind of performing section, so high performing teams will have documented about their existing ways of working, you know, like how they make decisions and what happens if people step out of line, and kind of maybe some stuff around culture. And so you have stuff documented around that stuff. And if there is a sense that somebody coming in isn't going to be a good fit, then you really want to kind of maintain that boundary of the group and have some way of saying, you know, thanks so much for your interest. We think you have a lot to offer, but we're not inviting you to join the group at this time. And this is the reason why. We don't see that you'd be a good fit for this group. And here's how we operate. And then you'd have to do some sensitive feedback process.
And how would you do that to somebody like that type? I mean, I'm just curious how you would actually
Yeah,
frame that
yeah,
to not be offensive to the person. You know?
yeah. Well, I mean, I can do something kind of in abstract around it that might sound a bit weird, but you know, I have done this kind of stuff before. It might be something like, you know, we've had some feedback from some of the group members that have spoken with you around your style of communication being very kind of forthright and driving things forward and, you know, being very clear about what you think should happen. And that's not such a great fit for our group. In our group, we tend to do more listening. We tend to be a bit more, you know, doing things by agreement. And even though that way of working is great, it's not really a way of working that we think would fit so well. You know, something like that, kind of diplomatically put. And if I was there, you know, I do a whole training in giving and receiving feedback that uses a specific process of, you know, when this happened and then you name the behavior, here was the impact. You know, maybe you're familiar with that. And so if you name, you know, the observable behavior and the impact, you know, and then that can be a way of giving feedback as well. But really important, I think, that you raise it so that you can prevent people who you don't want to be joining the group to join. Yeah, and exactly, Sonia. So NVC, nonviolent communication, could be another kind of method of doing that as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on this? Any other comments or questions, reflections, any good practice you have to share about it with others?
Yeah, so we were reflecting. Well, first of all, just on that point, I can say that straight after we make a vision, mission, and aims for a group, we then create a culture. And
Yeah.
so if someone is not upholding the culture, then we have a process, a policy, a process, like it could be like a performance review or something that, and so the process is where we ask them first, how much of this culture do you feel you are putting into action? And where do you feel you are not? So it's not us straight away pointing the finger at them saying, you're not doing this, you're not. It comes from them. And then we can feedback. And if there's a mismatch, then we can, you know, work out how we politely kind of navigate that and say, well, this is our experience. But the question, the feedback that I had was what we discussed in our breakout group is, when a group comes together, we need to think about what is the bare minimum things that this person needs to know to really be able to navigate and be part of this group. So rather than give them every single, you know, Google Docs folder and spreadsheet and information overload, what's the bare minimum they need to know so they feel comfortable, but then give them lots of experiences where we listen to them, where they take charge of something, where they feel they have contributed something significant to the project. And how do we do this? And what kind of things can we do that really make things fun? So I was thinking back to one particular event where you know, we've been together for 2 years. Someone new came in, barely spoke any English. It was an international project, and she was very, very shy. She didn't speak much English, and so we just found different ways in which to include her. We knew she does a lot of work with children, so we just got her to sing us some songs in her language, and we, you know, we made fun of ourselves for not being able to, you know, sing in Czech. And that just, and she said after that week, she said, it's like I've known you for years. It's really, it's, wow, you're such a beautiful, it's like I've known you for years. And the other thing is we did a chili induction. She had one of my chili sauces. And so, so that kind of, you know, and everyone's been through that initiation to be part of my project. So it's just those little fun things that we can then tell stories about later on. It makes you feel, yeah, I'm really part of this team.
Yeah, great. And both of those things, Rakesh, really speak to the concept of belonging, finding ways to help people feel like they belong, and can be there. Yeah. Thank you. Well, we'll take one more on this and then we'll move on to the next step. Philippa.
Thank you. I did not really have time to talk in our group, and maybe I just wanted to end what I was saying, because I think that this is very alive to me. There are two things, two elements, because I keep having always working with groups at international level in Transition Network, but as well in my own groups on the ground. And I see how difficult it is when you are not professionalized on the ground. So you don't think about these things all the time, and there is no structures. So one difficulty that is really interesting, and I have been observing, is that in the transition movement, in transition initiatives, there is a deep, deep, deep sense of inclusion. And we feel very, very guilty of not including. So this is like a disease. It's a very positive thing, but it's something with a lot of shadow. And putting rules and you know, like conditions, the membrane. My groups in Portugal, this is the most difficult thing, is how do we put a membrane in a movement that we include everyone, you know? So, and it's very dangerous as well, because I see a lot of groups exploding because of that. And we have been thinking about, yes, we are inclusive, but how can we prepare for this inclusiveness in terms of having a good culture in the group, very solid, and getting people one by one, instead of being just open, you know? That is one issue that I really find it very interesting. And the other issue that I find very interesting is that, for example, Transition Network always struggles with induction, always. And you really, really try to structure it and think about that. I think that there is a problem that is really interesting. You know, I have specialized as well in shared governance. So I studied Sociocracy for All, Allocracy, Université du Nou, that is the French thing. And one thing that I discovered is more you go in deep into building another logic, an alternative to the ways the world does, more difficult is to induce people, to bring people in. And on top, if you spend many, many years working like that, you lose the sight of what is normal and what is not, you know? So you see what I mean? So it's like, I work like that for years now. So it's really difficult for me to imagine what people don't know, you know? So it's another thing that I find interesting. When you go in building a culture that is really difficult from the normal, more you need to be attentive to even writing what is not normal for other people, because otherwise I found really painful to see new people in my organization being powerless and not having access to the tool or to the power, because they don't really understand, and we lose the means to explain it. Does it make sense to you what I'm saying?
Yeah. And in that regard, it's often good to have somebody who's also quite new in the organization to be doing the induction, because they're a bit closer to where new people coming in might be, rather than having the old timers experts, you know. And it's also a good way for the newer people to learn as well. We're doing that thing of like starting off and opening up at the beginning, and then loads of stuff comes in, and then the trainer goes, oh yeah, but we've got to move on because we've got to get through the rest of the session. So I'm going to do that thing just so that we do get to give enough time to the other stages as well. Yeah, I'll say one more piece about the inclusion and then move on. And the thing about the inclusion is I've seen a lot of groups kind of get tripped up on this, is because inclusion is a thing, and it's really good to be inclusive, but every single organization can't be absolutely inclusive for every single person. It just doesn't work that way. So what is required is for organizations to have an identity the identity forms the membrane. They're clear about their you know, what the membrane lets in and what the membrane doesn't let in, and who's a good fit for that organization. And if someone's not a good fit for that particular group or that particular organization, it's like, well, there's loads of other organizations or groups they could go and be a good fit for, and then they can be included in that way. And it's not that we have to be the one that includes absolutely everybody, because then it becomes too dissolved and too diluted. There needs to be some, you know, structure, focus, and so on. Anyway, we could spend weeks even just talking about that issue, but I'm going to move us on. I'm going to share in the chat. This is the link to the sheet that I'm going through. So if you want to refer to it in the groups, feel free to click on the link and you can refer to it in the next group. And I'll just share my screen again just to carry on to the next stage. So the next stage after you've welcomed people in is about, once they're in, well, how do we then sustain the involvement of people? And what's needed here, in order for the involvement to be sustained, and this means, you know, not getting burnt out, not getting bored, not falling out with other people, you know, the foundation of what sustaining involvement is there being enough of a balance between giving and receiving, so that people are contributing to the group, you know, because often these are volunteers and they're giving their time voluntarily, so they're contributing, so that needs to happen, but also that they're receiving and that there's enough of a balance between the giving and receiving. And that balance of giving and receiving will mean different things for different people, and it needs attention. So, you know, this is what is often neglected in social change groups, community groups, activist groups, and often leads to burnout. Is like, and I've been there myself, is like, oh, I'm just giving and giving and giving, and I'm not getting enough back. So here's some things that can help with that. So celebrating achievements when things are achieved is like making time to stop and celebrate. I've been in so many groups that have said, yeah, we should celebrate more, but let's do the next action first. You know, oh yeah, and we must remember to celebrate next time, but there's this other really urgent action to do. So really making time to celebrate and evaluating what you've done to learn from it. So there's an action reflection cycle, you know, what have we done? What worked well? What didn't work? What can we do differently next time? And so on. Regularly asking people what they want to receive from their involvement. You know, I've been in some groups where someone's like, well, I'm really tired and burnt out and I just need a massage. You know, I'm like knackered. I need and someone's like, I'm a masseuse, I can give you a massage, you know, and so that can happen as well. And one of the main things that this person did was they gave massages to other people, and that was their contribution. So regularly asking that and keeping an eye on it, because it changes over time. And then also finding ways for people to learn new skills. So it might be that, you know, I've joined a group because I want to learn about marketing, or I want to learn about, you know, the psychology of change, and I want to be in a group that's doing that. And if somebody doesn't ask them, then they may never find that out, and they may never get to go and learn that new thing. So some of these things then: celebrating achievements, evaluation, asking people around a balance, and learning new skills and shadowing new roles. So we're going to do the same thing. And again, you can look at this now in your groups if you've got the link there. So click on the link so you've got that window open. Look at this in your groups and have a think about what good practice do you know? What's worked in your groups around this? And then are there any ideas in here that might help things work better in groups that you're in around sustaining involvement so people don't get burnt out or bored or fall out and leave? What came up in your group? What's particular good practice or particularly jumps out at you around sustaining involvement so people don't burn out? Let's see, anything here.
Okay, well, I'll share what I shared. Nick was in my group, but is just doing things. I was sharing about a group that I'm in, the Capitol Hill Tree Keepers, and just doing fun things, fun events. It doesn't necessarily have to be a reason for celebration, but we did a contest of like making up a song, and then, you know, just a pure fun kind of element and celebration. You know, it wasn't a celebration. It was just a, as they say, a purely fun activity and gathering then afterwards. And so I think to add those just pure fun activities and things in is really important as well. It creates bonding. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're saying fun for the sake of it, and it creates that bonding for people to, you know, kind of be more likely to be able to weather the storms together if they've got more of that glue from the fun stuff.
Yeah.
You know, the fun stuff kind of makes glue kind of seep out and then stick people together, and then we can weather the storms better. Yeah. Thank you. All right, let's take one more. That's great, Darlene. Thank you. Let's take one more from Anahi and then move on to the last stage.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And we were sharing with Sonia and where are you? And Liz. And one of the glues I experience strong is building relationship. Is the love that naturally grows when people feel they can trust. And in working group, I experience that when equivalence is present and the decision making really consider all the voices. So people feel seen and listened. We start naturally building relationships, and the check-ins and the check-outs in the meetings allow us on time to know about the other. And sometimes difficult moments arise, and we can be together in that moments, and that allows also to build stronger relationships. That, in my experience, is the best to work in that way and to collaborate in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Anahi. And that's really speaking to the fact that's a reason in terms of the 4 stages of group development: forming, storming, norming, and performing. When you're in the performing stage, all the different aspects of a well-functioning group kind of come together like a kind of interlocking puzzle, create the conditions for things to work really well, people to feel like they're having good contributions, having good impact, build good relationships, feel a sense of satisfaction from what they're doing. And then that's like, you know, a kind of peak experience of being in a group. You know, I don't know if any of you have experienced that, but all those things can really come together then and do that and feel really great like that. So thanks, Anahi. That's a really good picture there. All right, let's keep going. So Rakesh is saying, yeah, community glue practices and explore mainstream and margins. So yeah, that can really help as well in that stage of sustaining involvement, helping people explore those edges, speaking about power, rank, privilege, how those things are working in the group, bring it to the surface, and that can enable more depth as well. So all good stuff. All right, as we're coming towards the end of our time, let's move on to endings and let's look at what happens, good ways to be ending in groups and teams and relationships and all things like that. So endings, again, often very neglected. You know, I've been in loads of groups where suddenly you show up and it's like, oh yeah, you know, Jenny's not here this week. Well, why? Oh, she's left the group. Well, what do you mean she's left the group? You know, like there was no like, thank you, Jenny, no goodbye, Jenny, no celebration. It's like, oh, Jenny just left. And it feels a real shame when things like that happen. So there's something really about honoring kind of endings, just something our culture, especially Northwestern Europe, maybe so in North America, we're just not great at endings. You know, ending relationships, end of life stuff. You know, it's like we don't want to deal with the endings. It's difficult, it's painful, it's scary. But this is like, let's look at the endings in the face, let's be real about them, and let's actually celebrate them. So what needs to happen when people are leaving is acknowledging and appreciating people when they choose to leave. So there's really celebrating, and also having clear and respectful ways to ask people to leave if they need to be asked. Sometimes people do need to be asked to leave, and that's why it's really helpful to have clear membership criteria. And when people join a group, to be making some kind of agreement of like, yep, this is how we operate in a group. These are our ground rules, our group agreements, our code of conduct. And to have the understanding, if anybody steps outside of that, then you may be asked to leave the group because these are the conditions of being in the group. And by stepping out of it, stepping out of this agreement, you may then be asked to leave the group because of it. So that often comes up, and I know there's often a lot of difficulty around that, but there are good ways to do it. So some of the things that can help: having an exit interview when people leave. You know, how did your time go here? A bit of reflection. Explore what we could do better, differently for the future. Have some kind of leaving party, celebration, present. And if someone is being asked to leave, refer to an agreement to keep to ground rules, conflict management policy, and so on when they join the group. So make that up front at the beginning, and then you can refer to it of like, well, this is why you did agree to this, and now you're not aligning with it, so it means you're no longer a good fit for this group. In the last 6 minutes, we can see what came up around that. Good practice, you've shared. Bad practice, anything you want to share about it? Julian?
What we didn't tackle was how to ask people to leave, because that's the hardest thing, I think. It was interesting, Darlene brought up the difficulty of not including somebody who wants to join, but I think asking people to leave and getting clear enough to know that's what action needs to happen is the hardest thing. Yeah.
So I can speak a little bit to that, and I'm curious to hear what other people have to say about it. But it's very important when you need to ask somebody to leave that it's not really directed to be like a personal attack on them, of like, we're kicking you out because we don't like you here, you know. And it's very hard when someone is asked to leave to not take it personally like that. So one of the goals of like a good, healthy group asking people to leave is having a good, strong boundary, like I was saying at the beginning in the membership criteria, and then a good orientation process when somebody comes in, which includes, here's what it means to be a member of this group, and here's our code of conduct, and here's our ground rules. And if people step outside of those, then you may be asked to leave. So you're already setting up the kind of clear boundary right from the very beginning. That's part of the welcoming stage, right? And then you can make it an agreement and saying, by you joining this group, you're agreeing to, you know, being a part of this group means aligning with these things. So are you willing to align with these things to be a part of this group? So you then got their consent of like, yes, I'm going to align with these things to be part of this group. And then if anybody, and this applies equally to anybody in the group, right? So equally the founders or new people or whatever, if anybody steps outside of those boundaries, then somebody can say, or anybody can say, now you're not aligning with those things that you agreed to, and now we need to question whether it's the right thing for you to continue to be a member of this group or not. And the other piece that I'd add to that is, if there's not a specific role identified to do that, then people will often leave it and not do it because it's a difficult conversation. So you may need to have a role in your group, something like, you know, boundary steward or membership steward or something like that, who specifically has a role around looking after the health and vitality of the boundary and safety in the group. And it could then be one of their, you know, whatever mandates or responsibilities or accountabilities on that role for having the conversation to review people's membership of the group if they're not aligning with the group agreements. You know, this is a big topic and I could talk about it for a long time. I don't want to go on about it for too long, but that's the kind of short version of it. Does that give you a sense, Julian? Okay, just in the last minute or two before Dan comes in, then anything else on this, on what I just said, or any other points? Philippa.
I just wanted to share something that came up in our group and for my colleagues that are here, and because I'm going to pursue that, I was sharing that in Transition Network, we in the beginning, we did not do that. It was very, very emotional kind of thing for some people, you know, that we valued and they left and we would do something. But then we started to be a policy. So there is a path for that. And one of the things is to have a steward, like for the induction. We have a steward for induction. We have a steward for stepping out of the group. And then there is an interview, and then there is a celebration. that we normally have in the same way. So there are rounds of appreciation and all that, and then a present. And there is someone in my group, Eileen, was in my group and said, it would be great to have those resources. We never thought about translating those kind of resources, you know. It might be interesting because other groups would use them. So that just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, great, thank you. So the Effective Collaboration course has in it a range of resources like this. I don't know if it has that specifically, but there's a range of resources that can be used on this. So you could look at that Effective Collaboration course. You could try and use that as a result.